please say who you are and which company you're from. And
Good afternoon, Henry Lang from Gold Associates. First question for Ian Rosebery. It's about percentage recovery. We're talking about the mature fields in Russia, and I was wondering what sort of percentage recovery is achieved on them and the effect that sort of modern EOR can have on it. And to some extent, saying you're obviously referring to EOR on your field, Rosebery. Is it purely that you've added horizontal drilling, or are you going for advanced techniques as well?
right, hang on a sec, because Adam, we've discovered, let's make discovery in this last 30 seconds that we only have one microphone.
Okay, so presumably that's using the microphone. Right. We do some EOR, and I would suggest it's probably not as major or sophisticated as you're discussing. We've actually got new fields in Kazakhstan. In Tajikistan we have done some EOR, but it is quite limited because the fields were late life, and frankly when they're late life, they are late life. And in Uzbekistan we've done quite a bit on a patch reef and oil field in the Amudarya Basin. So with that as background, we've used this thing called radial drilling because it's cheaper and cheerful. In fact, we did do one, I'd call it high angle long reach well, a new well across the reef in Uzbekistan. But the radial drilling, on which we've published some papers and data, does increase your production and it's much cheaper. You drill a vertical hole and then you can put out up to 100 meter horizontal prongs come out from the bottom of your vertical well. So that's what we've been doing because it's much cheaper than perhaps more sophisticated techniques. So that gives us quite a good return on our money, but there's not a hell of a lot left in the fields where we've applied it.
Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult to give a number on the recovery we expect. We tend to feel in Russia that these fields keep on producing, and we're still at a stage where the application of technology is ramping up as we go forwards. And so figuring out what the ultimate recovery is going to be is not that clear. It's not like somewhere like the Norwegian offshore where we know stuff will apply, water, oils and gas and get up to 50% recovery. It is still early stages in that kind of thing. So I wouldn't really want to put a number on the recovery we expect.
Yeah, let me just follow up with, obviously, when you think about your winners and losers, TNK, BP obviously drew heavily on BP's experience and actually knowing some of the especially BP's experience in Alaska. The second in your list was?
Gazprom next, just a second.
And were they DIY or did they use a big partner to help them do it?
Well, they worked more and more with Shell recently, and Salim's a good example that Julie touched on earlier. And that step up that we've seen in the technology that Gazprom apply has followed from the work they've been doing with Shell. And they're now partnering on Arctic exploration, so maybe that is further potential benefit.
And Surrogate, who were one of the losers, did they have a Western partner or were they DIY?
They are more DIY.
Okay, so it's important to Russian companies to have a Western partner who understands the technology.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at.
I just wanted to add one general point. It struck me that I think whether you want to do a horizontal well or frac obviously depends on your reservoir. Not every development scheme needs that to increase your recovery factor. And also that when we're comparing like for like, most of the Soviet C1, C2 published reserves actually have a lower reserve but a very high recovery factor, whereas we tend to quote a high in place and then so much of a recovery factor. So I'm not sure if you're always comparing apples with apples.
Both, right. I think the other thing with someone like Gazprom yet, they've obviously had the project with Shell at Sun, but they've also been working, I think, very closely with big Western service companies, with Schlumberger and Halliburton, and I think not necessarily a partnership with a Western oil company so much as potentially with a Western service provider. This is where Serbian gas, I think, has fallen out. It is in many ways Serbian gas appears to be the last bastion of Soviet thinking in the oil sector.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, we're going to keep going till lunchtime. That's 2 o'clock. Yeah, do. And say you.
Gareth Farrell from NetEx. Finished with roading, but I think what we hopefully could add to it. Obviously, the political climate is one thing, getting to the country, but from a sort of geological point of view and exploration and obviously looking for potential systems and plays, your initial sort of data gathering, what sort of things do you look at or go to? I mean, apart from obviously once you found there and looking at the size and looking further exploration wells, your initial data, as we know, is quite sparse, and I've worked on this area, and it can be quite difficult, notwithstanding the language barrier. So in terms of data sources and procuring some of your initial data to point you in the right direction for your potential systems you can look at for diving in further and more detail, where do you go and what do you look for?
So the quick answer is, we don't have the money to buy the NetEx studies. In the first instance, we always do a basin study before we do a new venture. We have to do that in-house, and we're using published sources. But we do try and browse the web using also Russian, and we have some helpers who help us do this to find the original Soviet crowdsourced data.
I would love to add something to that, but I think the role that we're in, we don't go to that level on geological data. We are largely reliant on companies, and actually when we first started to look at the Bajnok Shale, we actually used some data from NetEx yourselves, which was excellent, and actually as good as it's got.
The advertising slot we charge for.
But yeah, from our point of view, there is not that much publicly available good geological data that we can find out beyond what the companies and independent consultants like yourself provide.
So it wasn't a stable bit, it was curiosity really from your point of view.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have a great deal new to add to a lot of that. It is difficult to find the good quality data. I think that people who went feet first into Azerbaijan in the mid-1990s on the basis of data that may or may not have been acquired from the Academy of Sciences and the Petroleum Ministry or whatever in Azerbaijan. They may wish they looked a little more questioningly at that data. And I think that remains an issue.
It's a good question, actually. Do you think things are... I mean, it's 10 years since I was in Moscow, and there was a chasm between geologists and geophysicists, and then between them and everybody else, and between people who had a job in an oil company and people who worked in an institute. Has that all changed, or is it all just the same? Is it progressing, I guess?
I think it's progressing, but at the sort of pace that everything else in the region progresses, so very slowly. I've been involved with the Moscow School of Management at Skolkovo for the last year. We've been doing some executive education training for oil industry people from Russian oil companies, trying to sort of teach about the way the oil business works outside of Russia. So there's certainly that kind of a desire, and interestingly, this is coming from the companies like Oil, TNK, Gazprom, the same companies that are at the top of your list of the ones likely to, the most likely to succeed. But I do think that this sort of mixing within the scientific disciplines is still proceeding something thrown at a geologically slow pace.
Glacial.
Even slower than that.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, please, in the middle. Next time we're here, we will have an extra microphone.
I am David Sullivan from Geotrace. We work extensively with SME oil companies in the Russian region. And our experience is that a lot of very straightforward and potential projects for improved recovery of brownfield sites fail to find finance, largely because of the stigma attached to some of the high-profile failures. Do the people on the panel think that some of our own shared experience stigmatises smaller projects in the former Soviet Union?
David, you were talking about experience in Russia or experience outside Russia?
In Russia, if you're to go to try and get structured finance for a small oil company, which would be an absolute no-brainer in some very dodgy parts of the world, frankly, it is very difficult to get that finance arranged in Russia. And some of the, we feel that perhaps the financial community's bad experience and larger, high-profile projects which are unrelated are causing, are preventing some very decent projects getting moving in smaller companies.
We don't look at the small projects in the same way, but perhaps I'll comment on the stigma attached to Russian investments that we still see. For example, if we talk to a lot of US investors, for example, these are often guys who invested in Russian oil around the time of Yukos and Stigma and lost money then. And actually, despite change in politics and a lot of water under the bridge since then, they are still very unwilling to invest in Russia, having been burned once. And I think that kind of shows that a certain stigma, whether rational or not, still attaches.
Rosemary, you're nodding.
I can, definitely back that up. Technically, people have demonstrated that say the West Siberian onshore little fields for EOR would be exactly the sort of project Tethys could do technically very well. But my boss, and the shareholders really don't want to support it. So I agree. I think that's a big problem because if they have auctions and no one's applying, they need to think about do they want to do something with that and when.
Yeah, I certainly think that from raising finance externally, that I concur. Raising finance internally within Russia, I'm not sure. It could be that these kinds of projects just don't tick the right boxes of what potential investors in the Russian oil industry feel they should be investing in. It's not, it's not a big high impact exploration project. It's some slightly dirty, grubby little project. I don't mean to be insulting, but the view is that perhaps that it's not the attractive high-profile investment that's going to make the huge returns that people potentially, I think, still feel that the oil industry ought to make. And I think this starts right at the top. This sort of filters down from the sort of view that you see or hear being put forward by the president and others that Russia is this great superpower. The Russian oil industry is the biggest in the world. You get Gazprom saying there's no place for shale gas. It's irrelevant. It's not just irrelevant in Russia, where they've got huge conventional reserves, but it's irrelevant in Europe and everywhere else. And it creates this sort of environment that if it's not, if it's not a huge exploration play off the Arctic, which is the forefront of the industry, and it's the cutting edge of technology and the cutting edge of this, that, and the other, then that's best left to something else.
Yeah, interesting. Anybody else? I'm not serious about going to 2, or even 1 o'clock. Anybody else? Yeah, what? Please, again.
Sorry, Henry Lang again. Really for you, Julian, are we seeing the Chinese come into this area? Or is there, I suppose, a geopolitical naivety in that question that the two won't mix?
The Chinese are certainly extraordinarily active in Central Asia, and if you look at it doesn't really matter whether it's Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan or now Tajikistan, they are moving in extremely aggressively. It's noticeable that they're talking of the possibility that the fourth gas pipeline from Turkmenistan to China, and this was only, the first one was only proposed in, was it 2006 or 2007? They're now building the third and talking about the fourth. The fourth might take a completely different route. Instead of running through Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan and southern Kazakhstan, it may well loop southwards through northern Afghanistan, where China has picked up acreage, through Tajikistan, where China has, CNPC has farmed into the Tethys acreage, and out following the route of a road across the high Pamirs that the Chinese have just completed to the Tajikistan into China. So in that part of the world, yes. In Russia, I think it's a very different story. I think it's mutual suspicion. They have managed to do a couple of fairly substantial oil deals, which have led to the construction of this pipeline from the East Siberia pipeline in Russia down to Dachin, which they're now talking of doubling the capacity of. The reason they managed to do that deal, I think, was because China had a very clear and very present need for Russian oil. They have been negotiating a gas deal between Gazprom and CNPC, and that deal has been imminent, i.e. the sales and purchase agreement would be signed within 6 months since the summer of 2006. That's the longest 6 months that I'm aware of. The reason they haven't, I think, the reason fundamentally that they haven't got anywhere with that is that China's need for Russian gas is actually much less pressing than its need was for oil. In the meantime, it's secured significant volumes of gas from Central Asia. The difference for China is if it doesn't have oil, its cars and its trucks and its construction stop working. If it doesn't have gas, it burns coal. That's the real difference. There is a long history of mutual suspicion. Chinese companies want what they have in Central Asia, which is upstream access. They can then take an upstream margin out of that, which sort of helps with the whole economics of the deal. The Russians have been extremely unwilling to give them that upstream access. There's been on and off talk of first CNPC and now Sinopec investing or taking a stake in Yamal LNG with Novatec. There has been talk of exploration and production tie-ups beginning to emerge between Russia and China. But I think it's a long and complicated process because of these very deep-seated and very historic areas of mistrust between the two countries.
Yeah. All right.
Mr. Ivan, yes. You were talking that historically there was a development, there's a lack of technical expertise in developing of professional assets. And as I understand, mainly the only major reservoirs were targeted initially. Has anybody evaluated the potential of, the smaller fields? Probably left undiscovered because they're not such a big in volume.
We would like to.
Well, look, I don't know that I have anything terribly clever to say. If you talk to a lot of the people who are involved in the Russian oil business, they remain convinced that the potential of West Siberia is still huge. From satellites of the existing big fields, from other deeper horizons beneath the producing horizons in the big fields. There certainly is significant anecdotal evidence that there is a great deal of potential from small fields in West Siberia and from the Urals Basin. I don't have hard numbers to back that up, and certainly I think we would see the production costs of those coming out significantly higher than some of the figures that Oz was putting up earlier on. But I think there is significant potential there. Part of the problem is creating the right fiscal framework to make those attractive. This has been one of the problems in West Siberia, that the fiscal terms don't make it economic very often to chase the EOR type projects or a lot of the smaller fields. There is an understanding of that that's emerging. The problem is that while the Ministry of Energy is very keen to get the tax regime changed to promote these kinds of projects, the Ministry of Finance is still overly dependent on the oil and gas sector for state revenues. And I was quite struck. I had a meeting with a representative of the Russian government earlier this year, 3 days after the price of Brent had dropped below $100 a barrel, and he was in a panic that this was a level of oil prices, not that the Russian oil industry couldn't deal with, but that the Russian state budget couldn't cope with. And this is the sort of pressure, I think, that the industry is under, that the federal budget needs the revenues, and it makes it very difficult then to see the tax regime being restructured in a way that actually supports a lot of these small projects. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah, let me try something, because 10 years ago, when I retired from BP, I went and worked in Moscow for 2 or 3 years as a consultant for TNK BP that was just formed at that time. And so I did 2 things. One was working for the exploration director on how do you run exploration, and the other was how do you form a geophysical entity. And actually, the exploration we were doing wasn't frontier exploration in the Arctic or even in Siberia. It was the sort of thing you're talking about, we discovered. So there would be a 1-mile discovery in Uba, say, and we had this amazing idea that if you shot 3D seismic over it in a big enough grid, you would actually see the stratigraphy and all that sort of thing. And that's really what we were doing, shooting 2D and then 3D in big volumes like we were used to back home, so to speak, and making discoveries. But really what we were doing with, what's the word I'm looking And really, that's one of the reasons TNKVP's has had some growth in production. So things like UVAC came on stream. I mean, the interesting question, as Julian said, is what happens when TNK disappears into North Africa? Who didn't do that? So there were sort of two technology strands.